Thanks, April.
Okay, so you are live. Courtney or Eric, who would like to become the host? I can.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks, April. And I think we're waiting for a few more committee members.
Okay, have a good day, you guys. Bye, April.
Bye.
Thanks, April.
I'm just gonna hold this fresh cup of tea till my hands warm up. It's chilly.
It is chilly.
It's that damp kind of cold that gets in your bones.
I spend most of my day with a cup of tea in my hands, Corey.
I'm wearing like 3 layers. I have an illegal, I shouldn't say that on the live stream, space heater under my desk and a warm beverage. And I will warm up here.
I sit with a blanket on my lap all the time.
I think I might bring a blanket in because that would be more energy efficient than the heater under my desk. Maybe I'll hit an after Christmas sale.
Hi, Jamie.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Still a half a cup of coffee, so don't ask me any tough questions for the first part of the meeting, okay? That's the deal, everyone.
At work.
Yeah, Eric's already, he heard what I said. He's got that going.
Yeah. We're still waiting for Bruce. And I presume he's attending. I talked to him, I guess it's been last week. I can't imagine.
Yeah, I just texted him, so
Thank you.
hopefully he'll join.
Okay.
Looks like you may have just joined the Teams.
Yeah, or the teams.
Instead of,
We've got to figure out how to stop that.
Yeah.
So I'll pop over and come back.
Jesse, welcome. Is this your first official meeting?
it is, yeah. Thank you.
Nice. Welcome to the
Glad
party.
to be here. Yeah, thank you.
And Corey, it's fun to see actual movement in the background. So
Yeah, I used to sit on the other side of the building and you just see downtown. I didn't realize how entertained I would be by like the freeway because it's just like it's behind me and I'll notice like, oh, it stopped. And I've been here and they've closed the freeway like 3 times since while I've been sitting here. And then you're like, wait a minute. And you get up and walk around and try to figure out what's going on. It is actually kind of fun.
we live on a gravel road in a pretty rural area. And I was talking to someone about, they were asking, what's that crossover with rural? And I realized that for us, it's like when it would be rude not to wave when someone's driving by. That's like that crossover. And I think you would be pretty busy if that was your rule of thumb as well, because
There's no way. So I do remember when I mapped soils in South Malheur County and I was meeting everyone, and that was I was this Portland person. They're like, you don't drive by someone's house without stopping and knocking on the door and saying hi, so they know what you're doing. I'm like, I'm glad somebody told me. But by the end of the summer, everyone knew me and I knew everybody. Was wonderful.
Yeah. So Southern Valley, or so you stopped by the coffee shop in JV in Jordan Valley? So my
Basque restaurant.
Yeah. So yeah, but the coffee shop, the Rock House, is my wife's grandma raised her young kids there. Yeah, and the big white house next door is still in the family. So
yeah. Well, I mapped souls in A-Rock, so I like knew everybody.
Nice.
And by the end of the summer, like, we've been waiting for you to show up. I'm like, sorry it took so long.
Nice. Hey Kelly, how's Southern Oregon going?
It's good. It's been a little snowy here the last couple of days.
Nice. We're
Yeah.
Central Oregon.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see it.
Yeah. I hope some of it sticks in the hills so we've got water next summer. This drought's been devastating.
Yeah, I think it is. There's quite a bit in the hills and the mountains around us. So I'm hoping it just keeps coming.
Yeah. Super. Okay, I think I need to text Bruce again. I cannot entertain people for this long. I've run out of questions to ask.
They're on their way over.
Okay. And I know
we're stuck in an alternative universe.
Yeah. And do we, hey Bruce, I knew we were talking about the opportunity to have members of the public join us. Do we have folks from the public who are joining us today? Is that an opportunity we have?
Okay. All right.
Eric, you want to take that? Eric, you want to answer Jamie's question?
So Lisa, Jamie just asked if we have opportunity for members of the public to be participating, and this meeting is now being live streamed on YouTube. So that is where the public can
Excellent.
To this. Yeah.
So this meeting is not scheduled to have public comment, and I think we're still waiting for a couple more members that were in the Teams meeting that need to jump over to the Zoom. So sorry for the confusion. And we're going to try it in this format with it live on YouTube, and then have arranged the agenda for the full board meeting to have public comment early on the first day. So if people have comments or ideas based on the conversation of the committee today, they'll be able to express those at that point. And they're always, they can always provide written comment as well that we can share and then put that into the record as well. Okay.
Thanks.
Eric, do we have everybody now?
I think Eric Murray is still missing. So he was in the Teams, but I will see if I can go find him.
Okay. And Bruce, as chair, do you want to take the helm, or do you want me to do the facilitation?
I think it's fine if you would like to do that. I would be happy for you to do that.
Okay. How about if we co-facilitate? How's that work? That way you can keep it on your track.
Cool beans.
Terrific. Terrific. Okay. Any signs yet of our final board member?
Who are we waiting for, Brenda?
I'm here, Bruce.
Oh, good. I don't see it. Thanks.
We're just waiting on Eric Murray, and Eric Hartstein is trying to find him. If he lost in Teams or somewhere else. But everyone else is here.
So should we go ahead and just start by introducing ourselves and making sure everybody knows. So this is a committee meeting of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board Climate Committee on December 16th. And I am Lisa Hansen, the Executive Director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I'm going to go around and just kind of allow people to do introductions. So let's start with the board members first. Bruce, do you want to introduce yourself?
Bruce, you just
Bruce,
muted.
you're muted.
Got it. Now, I'm Bruce Buckmaster. I am a member at large from Astoria, Oregon, where we're having a clam tide this evening.
Brenda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Brenda McComb, Board of Forestry representative to OWEB's board.
Thank you. Jamie?
Jamie McLeod Skinner, member at large of the OWEB board, based in Central Oregon.
Thank you. Corey?
Good morning, Corey Owens with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I am a, federal advisor to the board. This is my first climate meeting, so I'm not exactly sure how I slot in. So thank you.
Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Coates. I'm the tribal representative on the OWEB board, and I am in Southwest Oregon.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Henson. I'm the state supervisor for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Like Corey, a non-voting member of the board or board of advisors as a Fed. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll go to staff. So Jesse, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi everybody. Jessie Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OWEB.
Thanks. Stephanie, you're next on the screen for me.
Good morning, I'm Stephanie Page and I'm the Deputy Director of OWEB. It's great to meet all of you.
Audrey?
Morning, Audrey Hatch. I am the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator on staff at OWEB.
Courtney?
Hi, I am Courtney Schaff, the Business Operations Manager at OWEB, and closing the door for my barking dogs.
Great. And Eric?
Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator.
Terrific. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining the committee meeting. Hope everyone is doing well. I think we had 2 agenda items, and we wanted to go through, and I think what would help probably Stephanie, Jesse, and I, who are staffing the committee, is to get a little bit more background on the purpose statement. Well, we talked about the purpose statement a little bit in my first board meeting about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. And I've talked with several of you since. I am not accustomed to having purpose statements from the board. In my experience with the Department of Ag, our board typically did resolutions or action items. And resolutions were a statement of policy and intent, and an action item typically was something that was to be acted upon once and put into place, such as providing comment or responding to a letter from another board or commission. And so I've talked with Bruce about this some and trying to think about the conversations and understanding if the intent of the board with the climate statement was more of a statement of intent in terms of how we're going to prioritize. The board is going to prioritize the spending of OWEB, how our staff are going to look to evaluate projects as they come in to help put those funding priorities in place. Or when I read the full purpose statement again this morning and read the section about the climate lens, is that a thing? And so I think it would really help Steph and Jesse and I for you guys just to talk to us a little bit more about the intent, because we want to do everything we can to help you get there, and help us kind of get it square in our minds what the target is and what it is. And then after that, if we can talk about language and how the committee would like to proceed. And what I talked to Bruce about last week, because I really want to make sure we've done the work to help the board when we get to the full board committee meeting. If there's more work for us to do as staff, we'll go back and do that. And you know, it may be that we want to bring this committee together one more time prior to the full board meeting, just to make sure we've got everything in the spot that the board members want to move it forward to the full board. So Bruce, I'm going to hand it off to you. That's kind of my setup and get some feedback.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you to all the staff for. I know you've been very busy with the short session, special session, and so thanks for the work you've done on this. I was actually surprised to see so much that had been done. Just to give a little background, the climate committee, one of the reasons that it was created goes back to the OWEB report to Governor Brown in response to her executive order, and it said that OWEB is creating a climate lens with a board level climate committee. OWEB staff will work with the board to develop ways to apply an additional climate lens to its grant making using their newly formed climate committee. So that gives at least one of the reasons that the climate committee was formed and its charge, what we were supposed to do. And the second piece is why a statement of purpose rather than a resolution or another form of statement. And that goes back to our former director, who suggested we put together a statement of purpose. It was a policy. I think in the minds of, certainly in my mind, and I believe of the committee, we were looking at a general policy that we would be adding to our existing criteria, an additional criteria consistent with the strategic plan, the governor's executive order, to look additionally at, through a climate lens, at our projects. So that gives the background. Back to you, Lisa.
Jamie, Brenda, do you want to add anything to that?
I guess just a couple things in my mind to add to the conversation. I really appreciate, so just to start, OWEB's had the just such the blessing of having great leadership, and our previous ED, as Bruce mentioned, brought in great leadership. Lisa, you're really stepping up, and what's exciting and a real opportunity at this time of coming in with a fresh perspective is look at it and say, okay, why are you doing it that way, or is there other ways to do it? So I really appreciate these questions coming up. To Bruce's point, I agree. I think that was what we saw ourselves, the trajectory we saw ourselves on. But just what factors into my thinking with regard to this committee and the charge and how we're trying to figure out how to move forward on this is really twofold. You mentioned the governor's executive order, and that clearly provides direction. But there's also, and I just took a quick glance at the website to this reminder of like, what's our purpose and responsibility as board members? And so I just from our website, I'm seeing it really as twofold. It says the board meets 4 times a year to act on applications for funds to accomplish watershed restoration activities. So that piece we know, and is responsible for establishing Oregon's long-term strategy for achieving sustainable watershed health. And so I think this piece is really getting to that second point. So yes, we meet and we talk about how to allocate funds, and that's part of the conversation that we've been thinking about. Okay, what's that criteria and how do we incorporate climate health into that? But really this second point and this key responsibility of setting this long-term strategy. And so the conversation about climate, it's no longer theoretical. It's for anyone. I mean, looking at Kelly in Southern Oregon and the devastating wildfire in Southern Oregon and Central Oregon. I mean, everyone on this call, every part of the state's been hit, whether it's wildfire, drought, flooding, ice storms, heat wave. It is here, it is real, and it's impacting us as people. It's also, of course, impacting watershed health. And so there's a real urgency, and is what I've heard both Bruce and Brenda and my other colleagues on the board in general speak to the sense of urgency. And so in my mind, we have to be making decisions now that are in accordance with the funding restrictions that we have. So Measure 76 and those other things, Lisa, that you and I have talked about. And we have to move forward. We have to set some clear objectives and some clear measurable standards, because it's one thing to talk about the ideas. It's another thing to really clearly be able to show, yeah, we're doing it, and this is how we're doing it. And I know that as the OWEB team has really stepped up and tried to demonstrate climate, having a really sustainable approach to the agency's practices. But the real question before us, I think, is how do we establish that in terms of our investment of public funds for working with our partners to help them in achieving these long-term strategies and goals. And so that's kind of that big picture. Okay, now how do we narrow it down? And the essence of your question is, what's the best tool that we use to make that really clear? And so just looking at both of these, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me a reso is a strong statement that provides a general direction. When I'm looking at the drafts, what I am seeing though in the statement of purpose is some more tangible, broken down specifics. And I think we've got to get to those. And so if we just jump to that statement of purpose, or if we, again, I think a reso is intended to be more general. So we could have probably done a reso last year that would have gotten us to a statement of purpose now, till we really start to hammer out what tangible things do we want to accomplish, and then how do we work with our partners to help them. And there's been some great tools already developed. And of course, now we have Jesse on board also to do some of that hand holding and some of that specific development. And I know this is part of Stephanie's background as well, but how do we really possibly go through rulemaking to look at what the criteria is, help our partners through that process to make sure that by the next cycle, maybe not the one we're in now, but by the next cycle, we're making clear transparency, we're bringing our partners along, we're making sure we're not excluding people as part of our DEI effort as well. And bringing on non-traditional partners, but really ultimately are on track with tangible, measurable goals and holding ourselves to a high standard to get that done. So sorry, that was a big mouthful, it's a lot, but that's kind of how I'm seeing the discussion where we're at right now.
Actually,
Just the only thing that I would add to that is that other agencies have already stepped up and developed plans with actions and goals. And so I think that it's incumbent upon this agency to do the same thing.
And Brenda's showing off how succinct she can be, and she just showed off how wordy I am. So thanks, Brenda.
No, you two, you and Bruce, you covered it all. So I don't have much to add. Thank you.
Lisa, thanks, Brenda and Jamie. Just since we're talking to the committee, but also bringing new staff up to speed, I'll just mention that in our strategic plan, which I'm sure every new person has already studied and taken a test on, it's a great document. It does take a while to get through. But specifically about climate, going back to the 2018 strategic plan, on page 6, also on pretty much the same thing on page 29. It said that OWEB investments will result in measurable improvements that lead to healthier streams and healthier upland habitat while ensuring that the work of our grantees is resilient to long-term impacts of climate change and population dynamics. Then on page 22, it talks about, those are activity examples. It talks about identify areas of alignment between state climate change initiatives and OWEB funding. And on page 30, it says develop communication strategies to share results, incorporate scientific technical information, including climate science information, into restoring, planning, and support adaptive management by helping bridge the gap between research monitoring and on the ground work. And certainly Audrey did a great deal of that in the work she has done with the climate committee and climate action. So that gives a little more background as far as the charge to the climate committee and what we were looking at as we got to the statement of purpose and accompanying documents.
Okay. So this is a helpful conversation for me coming into this kind of on the 2/3, 3/4 of the way down the road and trying to get in my head what the board is asking for. So let's assume you would have adopted a resolution that would have said we're going this way. So then we have the purpose statement. So can you talk to me a little bit about what you would see as actionable, measurable actions and how you would want to or thinking that the board would incorporate that. A couple of things that we've talked about as staff trying to think about this is looking at our grant rules and the grant criteria and putting, something in there that helped us to prioritize projects with that climate lens. And so talk to me about when you're thinking about the climate lens, what you think that would look like. Because I'm trying to figure out how we put this into action to get to where you guys want to go. And I'm still trying to get my head around it. And then that's so that we do it right.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask Paul. If Brenda mentioned some other agencies have stepped forward and done this. I don't. There's those who've gone before can share some of the wisdom. Or Brenda, if you could just. I was thinking that may be a starting point.
Well, so first, before I mention what the Board of Forestry has done in ODF, Paul, since you're on and have knowledge of what the Biden administration is asking the federal agencies to do, how are the feds tackling this?
Well, I actually think that across the federal agency landscape, it's highly variable. First of all, much of the climate-related policy development is sort of, in my opinion, coming from ground up, within the agencies, sort of because everyone in the Fed families are still waiting for specific direction associated with the various budget bills. Now, the infrastructure bill has a fair amount in there for climate, fire, invasives, that kind of thing. And the Build Back Better bill, if anyone's looked at that, has a tremendous amount in that. But what hasn't happened, in my opinion, beyond some of the earlier sort of climate, kind of initiatives that, in the same generation that Bruce just referenced of at the state level, going back to 2018 or 2017, which was obviously in a previous administration that didn't necessarily have the same regard for the climate crisis issues that we're dealing with. there's almost a still, in my opinion, including, and I'll just speak specifically for Fish and Wildlife Service, there's not, beyond sort of general goals and aspirations, there's not a detailed policy plan that's come out. Now, in Oregon, for my office, I've offered one, written it up, put it in a memo, put it on letterhead, and sent it to my leadership, saying, and this was primarily on forest issues. I've offered that up, for folks to build on. But I got to say, we're still waiting. And I think to some extent, some of the specifics are going to be generated based on what is actually allocated budgetarily in these bills that then provide a kind of a map for how you will spend funding that we get to achieve these sort of broad goals of, the Biden administration, whether it's, fighting fires and dealing with, wildfire issues, dealing with forest health, dealing with carbon sequestration, carbon markets, all those kinds of things. But I don't know, maybe in NRCS and USDA, Corey sees something different, but that's kind of where we're at locally.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk with Debbie Holland and the regional forester for Region 6 last week, and they reflected the same thing, that it's quite variable at this point. Some agencies are moving forward pretty directly, but everybody's waiting on the funding piece. So in comparison to that, Oregon Department of Forestry staff has developed a climate change and carbon plan, which has fairly specific goals, has suggested actions, and is basically a template for the Board of Forestry to use when it's making decisions regarding changes in policy, forest policy. It's a document that I think I would characterize as evolving. It will change over time as we gain new information, but it is that template, and it does provide very clear direction for some aspects of climate change, particularly around how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions when managing forests. So these are the things that I see being somewhat parallel to what could be criteria within OWEB. How to reduce greenhouse gas emissions when managing forests, how to characterize and measure carbon stores, both above ground biomass as well as soil carbon and other sources of carbon. How to measure and accurately assess carbon sequestration and consequently carbon loss as a result of wood products use. And then finally, how to take the information we have regarding changing climate and adapt the forests to future climate conditions. So those are the four, I would say, pillars of that plan. And I think that all four of them relate directly to the kinds of projects that you might see come through OWEB. And so my vision, and I'm only speaking for myself here, I'm not going to speak for any of the other committee members here, is that in addition to the criteria that are used for ranking projects in terms of funding, we need criteria that address those pillars. How do we assess whether or not a proposal has considered the greenhouse gas emissions associated with what's being proposed? How have they considered the impact of on carbon stores? So for instance, if it's a stage 1 restoration, that's going to have a pretty significant impact short term. But then we can ask, have they considered sequestration and loss of carbon as a result of decomposition or use of those products, those things into any kind of a product that would decompose and release carbon over time. And then finally, have they considered the kinds of plants and animals that might react or respond to the project such that the long-term trajectory of the project would allow those species to likely exist under a new climate scenario. So those are the things that I see, and I think that they're captured pretty well in the ODF plan. I know ODFW has a plan. I've not looked at it, and since it first came out. Bruce, you may be more familiar with that one. But other agencies are going in this direction, and I think that many of the things that they've identified are consistent with some of the goals and objectives of projects within that we consider within OWEB.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Well, help me get more clarity. So Brenda, that makes sense to me. So then I'm kind of, I go to, okay, I think I understand where you want to go. Then I go to the how. So are you thinking these are additional qualitative questions, criteria that the applicants would respond to describe how their projects would meet some criteria, how it's reducing greenhouse? I'm just going to go to the ones you're familiar with ODF, because that makes sense that we would somehow try and have some alignment across the state enterprise. Reduce greenhouse gases, how they would measure carbon stores with it, and what those might be. So is it additional questions that they'd be responding to, or is it something else we would be doing? I'm trying to sort that piece out.
I'm just speaking for myself here. I really want to hear from other committee members, but yes, there would be additional questions that the applicants would respond to. Whether they are qualitative or quantitative, I think still has yet to be sorted out. I think that in either case, there needs to be someone who is a knowledgeable resource person who could answer questions that the applicants writing the proposals can go to for assistance. So I think there is both the criteria piece, but then there's also the support piece. And I think without that support piece, we're going to be perhaps seeing a wide variety of responses here that would be difficult to interpret. Bruce, Jamie?
Jamie?
I really appreciate all those. Let me defer to Paul. He's smarter than I am. Let him talk first, and then I'll weigh in.
Can I interrupt just for a second before we hear from Paul? I just noticed that, Paul, you and I were joined on the team meeting with Eric Murray, and I don't see him here. Can somebody reach out to Eric and Murray and let him know where we are?
Yes, both Renee Davis and I have been emailing with Eric and trying to get him the Zoom link so that he can join. So
thanks, Eric. Okay, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to just sort of add that one other thing, and I'm not sure if this is completely responsive to Lisa's question, but thinking ahead of how, if I was submitting projects, or proposals to OWEB now with some additional climate kind of criteria, and I, reading again through both the resolution and the statement of purpose, all those great, new criteria, or at least more explicit criteria relative to climate is all great. I have some editorial suggestions, we'll get to that later. But the only other factor that it shouldn't necessarily be in those documents, but clearly people are going to be wanting to understand is how we'll weight in the decisions, how we'll weight those various criteria. What is their weight? There will be projects that are super legit and awesome projects that won't be necessarily direct to climate change issues per se, or there'll be a couple of degrees of separation. I'm thinking of a few more specific, say, wildlife or fish projects or something. And then there's others that are super, direct and will provide pretty significant positive climate impacts, whether it's the sort of climate change mitigation sort of issues, or it's, aiding in sort of resilience or response of a resource to climate impacts, climate change impact. But how will we weight it? Is there, I'm worried that there'll be a pretty broad, as sort of what I think Brenda's saying, things are pretty broad. And so there'll be this general vague kind of, time check, but how you either qualitatively or quantitatively weight it such that it's sort of repeatable, predictable, and fair. And that's kind of the biggest next step that I see for how we measure these criteria. I know the word measurably was called out, I think in the resolution, how will we measure? And I think that's a really key question. And we're dealing with that when we're handing out a fair amount of funds against these criteria. And we've got to go beyond saying, well, it just looks good or it just feels right. We have to actually quantify it a little more.
Yeah, if I could respond to that. Thank you, Paul. That's great. I appreciate those comments. And the weighting is critical. You're right. But the climate weightings are not all or nothing, right? They're just part of the suite of criteria that are used to rank proposals.
Right.
So it's not going to, a proposal that has significant benefits to restoring habitat for an endangered species, even though it might be climate negative, could still finish very high and be one that would be funded. So I think I just want to make that point clear.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to say I agree with that too. And I think we just got to make sure everyone else understands that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The other piece is the measurable piece, and there is data available on above ground biomass. Now, soil carbon and that sort of thing is a little bit more difficult to get, but there are some pieces of information out there that can be provided to grant writers that would help with the measurable component. I think it's incumbent upon us to probably figure out what those are and provide that suite of information to people. But thank you, Paul. Those are great comments.
Corey or Jamie? Kelly, if any of you have thoughts or comments? And then I guess Jesse has a question, I think, too.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead. Jamie, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. I have a kind of an idea that riffs a little bit off this. So let's finish this conversation first.
Oh, I would just say, speaking about the USDA and what NRCS is doing in climate, we're similar to Paul. We're waiting to see how the funding will land, but we are also, every USDA agency is coming up with its agency level plan, similar to what was published in the 2014 master USDA plan. So we're looking across all of our mission areas to see internally and externally how we can incorporate climate and our Tom Vilsack's climate smart agriculture and forestry practices into our priorities and work. And that is going fast and furious. And I expect probably in February, early, late winter, there'll be, the next version of the USDA's document. And then the idea is that would guide whatever funding, is coming through. So we are working on the plan. And then of course, when that stuff happens, it trickles down to the states, and then we learn how to figure out as the state of Oregon how that's going to work into our operations here in Oregon. As far as the conversation about adding the criteria and the fact that other agencies are already doing that kind of stuff, and that's obviously we're working on it. Sounds like ODF has got a really great dialed in plan. The challenge that I see, and of course I've worked around OWEB for years, but I've not been this involved in OWEB, but I've worked with the people who write the grants and the people who are applying to the projects and stuff. And when I think about ODF or even NRCS putting together our climate plan and how we're going to measure everything and how it's all going to work, I just feel like we have the body of this huge institution behind it that can figure it out and dial it in and make it systematic. But when you're asking these grantees, I think, Brenda, your point about having to have that support is going to be extremely critical, because each of these small entities, it's everything they can do to get it all together to get this grant that they've been dreaming about for years. And then we add this component, and that's where the communication, Paul, that this is just one part of the criteria is so critical. To me, way OWEB can have a real strength is providing some sort of again, the word systematic way in which it can look at the climate and not put an undue burden on these, 2 people strong watershed councils who are trying to get this project on the ground. And now there's this extra layer of expertise that the truth is that a lot of our ag professionals don't have this layer of expertise and the tools that ODF is coming with, that would be amazing, Brenda. If they're coming out with ways that they're measuring that we can, incorporate, and just the standards that they're deciding to use, a way that we can make those kind of things available so it's easier for OWEB applicants to be able to do this. Because the last thing we want is for people to be, unable to fill in those answers well enough, and then you kind of have to track it. Like, was that the difference between someone getting funded or not? Was that small little part? So I think the idea, you'll get into obviously the verbs and the purpose statement, that kind of stuff, but from an implementation perspective, especially thinking about the DEI, and we don't want to put an undue burden on those groups to have to do this. When you think about someone like ODF should be the trailblazer, someone like Forest Service and NRCS should be the trailblazers who are saying, we have to do this stuff and we're going to incorporate into our work, and then we're going to pay you more because you have to do it and it costs more and you have to adapt to it. Like, anytime you change something, there's risk and there's cost associated with that. So if OWEB's going to have all these greenhouse gas emission stuff, like, do you get an extra couple $1,000 just on the top automatically to be able to, find the vendors who can do the work? So I think that the wonderful discussion on the structure of how this is going to go, and it's exciting to see, I think, the way OWEB is in such a unique position to take what is happening in these big institutions and make it work for these smaller groups that are such a key component of doing watershed restoration across Oregon, that you guys, it's a really unique place to be. And there's tension there, like too much too soon, not enough fast enough. And then, ODF has this plan, well, did it work? Before we're having these other folks do things. So those are just kind of my thoughts on the discussion that's gone on so far.
Thanks, Corey. I would just, again, since we've been at this, the climate committee, I think it's important to note that there has not been a sense at the climate committee that we were producing a finished product with all the evaluation data and how it was, or data points that would be required, and that we recognize all those things that you were talking about, Corey. They're very important. An addendum that was put in with I think at the last board meeting, was the page on the global standards for the IUCN, which does a lot. It gives a lot of general information on a questionnaire, on questionnaires that could be a little more expansive than does it look good or does it feel right. They actually have some good, solid requests for information. So how we end up with a final product. There was a question that came from the staff on the resolution draft that was talking about quantitative or qualitative, and certainly I think it's going to have to be both. Where we can quantify, we need to quantify, and tools are emerging. Tools currently exist. Additional tools are being developed where at some point we're going to be able to do a great deal more to quantify. But a lot of the initial questions, and I think many of them were included in the work that Audrey did. And the first, Audrey, did you draft the questionnaire that went out? Was that your work product that went out to to the grantees? Didn't we do it?
Thanks, Bruce. Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator. So the work that I did last spring was drafting the questions,
right,
that the committee then kind of reviewed. So I want to make sure, because I think there's been other things happening. I think that's the same thing you're talking about.
Yes, yeah. Okay, thanks, Audrey. So we actually did general questions at that point. And so there's a lot of things that are going on. Certainly we'll have issues that are projects that Paul was talking about, a fisheries or a wildlife issue. It may be that we're talking about having to evaluate resilience regarding climate change on those types of projects, rather than a reforestation or any of the other projects we do that might have more solid or more easily quantifiable. So there's I guess my final comment is we realize that, I think the committee realized that this is and will continue to be a work in progress, but we needed to put a stake in the ground to say we're moving, that OWEB is moving in this path. And I think Jamie can take the gobbledygook I just said and make it sensible. Jamie?
Kelly's had her hand up for just a bit, Bruce. So let's let Kelly respond, and then I think Jesse also has a question comment.
Thanks. Yeah. So this is my first climate meeting, so I'm also learning as I go here. And I really appreciate all the background information on this. I think Corey and I very much align in thinking about how this is going to affect our grantees. And I know we heard very clearly at the last meeting that our grantees are concerned about being able to meet whatever requirements or standards we put in place for this. And so I'm glad that that's kind of in the forefront of everybody's mind right now while we're having this conversation. I think the support piece is going to be huge. My other question is, because other state agencies have already developed things, how do we make this consistent with what the other agencies are doing? I think that's going to be really key, because a lot of our grantees are also potentially going to be grantees from other state agencies or are going to be working with other state agencies on this. So I think consistency across the board is going to be really helpful with this. And I don't know if that conversation has already happened at the state level with the other agencies, or if there might be some type of standardized approach or template or guide that we could use for this. So we're not completely reinventing the wheel here, and we're making it a little bit easier on the grantees moving forward. So that was just kind of my question and thought there.
So let's ask Jamie or Jessie to respond. She had her hand up for quite a while.
Okay, well, let's see, Kelly, I'll do my best to respond to your question. I don't know if I'm the best suited, so if there's somebody else from OWEB, just based on the length of time, maybe Audrey, you have something else that you could add. So I don't, from my very limited knowledge, since I've only been here now for a couple of months, I haven't seen a template or any sort of concrete plan that's coming from other agencies in terms of exactly how they're doing this. I think it's very much in discussions with the different groups that we've been involved with, like the Oregon Global Warming Commission, Natural Working Lands, and trying to figure out how we work together with other agencies like ODF and ODA. But from my brief knowledge, there's nothing that groups, any agencies using yet, and we haven't necessarily all have figured that out in any way. Audrey's shaking her head yes, so I think I'm on track there. And then I think two things that I wanted to bring up. One is that Audrey and I have had a chance to just very preliminarily look through the responses to those climate questions that came back in the open solicitation round of grant applications. And some of the things that I can tell you is that from what I've seen, most of the applicants demonstrate a decent understanding of what the big climate changes are, that they need to be thinking about in their project geography, whether it's temperature or changes in precipitation or snowpack. You'll see you can start to see some geographic differences in terms of like the level of technical detail that's been provided. And I think one of the things that came up time and again, and it was the one that was most cited in terms of constraints, is just there's a lack of project level or site level data on climate projections. So people are really struggling with that, and how they can, if there's just general information available, how accurate is that? How do they actually use that in their planning? And when we asked that, one of the questions was about how you accounted for these impacts in your project design. The responses are all over the map. Okay, some are incredibly general, where it's just like, we need to be taking action, it's time to do this. Some are hitting more on the reducing emissions. This is how we're going to be, enhancing sequestration. And then some are focusing more on addressing climate impacts and vulnerabilities and adaptation. So the responses are like very, very, they're very broad, right? It's just like you're starting from one end of the spectrum going all the way to the other. So it will take some time and energy on the part of OWEB to get people where we want them to be. And this is not unique to other institutions or agencies that have asked people to respond to these kinds of questions. I spoke with someone down in California at the Wildlife Conservation Board who offered adaptation and mitigation related grants, and they said the same thing. The responses they got are just really very varied. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is just I've been delving a lot more recently into trying to get a better handle on specifics related to the benefits of current OWEB funded projects, and in terms of adaptation, mitigation, and co-benefits. So I've only looked at a handful of projects, but what I'm finding is, for example, I spent a bit of time looking at dam removal and trying to get a better sense of like, what does that mean in terms of emissions generated through that process compared with what might be sequestered. And you start to just, it's like an onion, right? You're just peeling it back. And I didn't realize this, but apparently reservoirs are a huge generator of methane emissions. I had no idea. So in fact, in taking out a dam, you are avoiding emissions by, reducing the methane that would be emitted. And so there are going to be these benefits that maybe aren't typically associated with projects, the OWEB funds, that we just don't have a good handle on yet. And so I think in my mind, there's the idea of OWEB needing to develop goals and how we want to be measuring and accounting for these, based on our agency versus what we're asking of our grantees to provide, because that level of sophistication and technical detail is going to be, that's a lot to be asking of those people, given that as I'm delving into this, I'm like, oh boy, trying to think about how you, all these different factors, and that's only related, to the removal, and then you've got what carbon stored in the soils, and you've got what if vegetation recolonizes. Are you doing it active or passive? What's the time? There's just so much that you're asking. And so it's, like I said, it's like peeling back an onion, and that's, I'll stop there, but just say, I spent a lot of time looking at this recently. So if you have questions or you want to talk more about this, I'm happy to talk with you offline.
So Stephanie has a question or a comment, and then I know we were waiting for Jamie, and then I've got a couple ideas or question that I want to throw back at the committee to help us try and get some forward momentum. Okay, Steph.
Okay, I think in a lot of ways my question's been covered, but I've just been thinking about the evaluation criteria and just how we consider adaptation benefits versus mitigation benefits. I think every project that OWEB funds has some combination of adaptation, mitigation benefits, or both. And so, I think picking between those two buckets is challenging. And I think several of you have made comments in that vein. So, but I think everything that folks have shared has been really helpful, I think, in understanding. I think what I'm hearing is you're interested in getting to the point where it's clear that applicants have thought about it, where OWEB's able to provide technical assistance to applicants on some considerations in developing projects related to adaptation and mitigation benefits, that you're interested in measuring those where possible. But I think particularly on the adaptation side, that is going to be pretty challenging. And I think when I look at quantifying other types of benefits from OWEB projects, like what will happen to fish populations, I mean, I think there are challenges with quantifying adaptation benefits of projects from many different lenses.
So Jamie, I think it was your turn.
Yeah, thanks. So I've really enjoyed this conversation and appreciate everyone's input on it. A couple of things just real briefly before I share an idea that came up. First, we were talking about these two different documents, and there's some really great stuff in both. And so things like in the reso, the whereas section, that really goes into the why, or like almost the preamble, the statement of purpose. I don't think we want to lose some of that great work and those great ideas. So just when we get to that pragmatic of what do we put on paper, I just want to note that. And then the other thing is, I really appreciate both Corey and Kelly, and I know it's true of staff as well, the sense of, okay, how do people actually do it? How do we facilitate this, like partners can do the work? And so I just want to be really clear. I'm not hearing an either or. I'm not hearing, oh, let's back off and not do it versus, so I think the challenge before us is how do we do both? And so I just want to reflect that so it doesn't sound like we're in conflict over the concept of addressing this issue and that sense of urgency again. And to the point that was just raised, and this had come up before, that sense of considering versus results, I would actually like to see us, it's not just considering and thinking about and even measuring, it's actually being able to show tangible results. I think that's the end goal in my mind. I've been juggling this in my mind, and we have really amazing, really smart and creative partners that we're working with. We're so fortunate, and OWEB's in a very different role at some of these agencies. So our big challenge in some ways, and part of it is ideas on how to do this work is just rolling out. And so there's big agencies, Paul spoke to this and some others as well. Corey spoke to it. There are these plans that big agencies have, and then in some cases there's a lot of, okay, wait and see what they do. So, and I disagree with that approach, by the way, but so the challenge is that we cannot provide clear direction as agencies can, but our opportunity also is that we can't provide clear direction because we do have these really smart and creative partners we're working with. So this would create a little shift in our thinking. And I'm almost thinking of like the classic startup in business, but if we have a different approach to how we evaluate things. So we do need this overall sense of measure. What are we trying to accomplish, and is it being accomplished? And to that point, I really think engaging with some of our statewide partners and having an agency, a statewide agency, responsible for determining what some of those measures are. So we are all on the same page, different agencies, and we are looking at those measurements. And so we're not putting the burden of measuring or having a baseline or some of those things on the shoulders of our partners. Their job is just to get the good work done. So I think that may be a challenge. And almost like we're talking about water, many different agencies on a statewide basis are talking about this long-term vision of a water plan and whatever we end up calling it going forward. But there's all that partnership to do that. I think also having that approach for climate. And so we have that, some of those baseline and some of those measures in place. So there is apples to apples comparison. But what about essentially having these measurable goals and providing the technical support and expertise to our partners, and then essentially measuring them, having them have some proactive goals, and having this impacts our funding because it's not as clearly cut as we've had in the past, but having some set goals that they seek to achieve, and then evaluating whether or not they've been able to achieve them. The other challenge here, of course, is some of these measurements don't happen year to year; they happen long term. But can we provide some of this kind of startup incentive money? We're still going to the end goal of Measure 76, what we're trying to accomplish, but create some incentive money and maybe even have provide incentives or bonuses, or looking at how we allocate money differently to stimulate some of this creativity in our partners. So again, that would be a very different approach to what we've done before, but I want to figure out ways that we can engage are very smart and creative on the ground partners in doing this work and helping us to be in that agency role of supporting them with the expertise they need and managing the resources. We're investing public funds, but also tapping into the creativity of our partners.
So Bruce, you have a comment, and then Audrey has a comment. And
yeah, thanks, Lisa. Two issues. First, regarding the when we talk about the smaller staff, smaller resourced grant applicants, I think we have to remember that those currently exist. They're operating now on the criteria that are already in place as we evaluate projects. We have a broad spectrum of expertise, and it's my opinion that we do a very good job, OWEB does a very good job of working with these smaller grantee groups with less resources, less expertise. So however we're doing it now with the criteria we're currently using, I don't believe there's ever been a suggestion that we would do less with additional criteria. So addressing Corey's very real concerns that we look at those, we know how to do that. We've proven we know how to do that, and we should continue to do that with whatever criteria, additional criteria we would add to OWEB grant making. So that said, I don't think we should look at the criteria and then reduce those to the least common denominator, where we would have only have the opportunity to say the least resourced project applicant could do this easily. We should challenge those with greater resources, larger projects. Certainly when we get into the FIT programs, I think it becomes maybe even more important and more detailed. And the last comment was a statewide group. Certainly the reading the great work that the Oregon Global Warming Commission has done, calling for climate lands, doing all the work that representatives from OWEB on the Global Warming Commission, hopefully that will be that, or some form of the Global Warming Commission can fulfill the role of cross-pollinating all of the criteria throughout the state agencies. Thanks.
so Courtney had a comment or response that she wanted to get out there. So Courtney.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to channel Eric Williams quickly today since he's not here. He's facilitating a review team meeting, and just something for all the board members to keep in mind about where OWEB's role has been in supporting our grantees historically. And there's a great graphic that Mita used to use during our board presentation, budget presentations to the legislature. So we have not historically been in the practice of providing that technical expertise to our grantees. We have relied on our state and federal partners that sit on the board to provide that technical expertise about dam removal, riparian projects, fish passage projects, sage grouse. And we have acted as the funder and then brought that technical expertise together in our review teams around the state to help us make funding decisions. And so just wanted to keep that in mind as we're thinking about the role of OWEB and providing technical assistance related to all the various topics we've talked about of measuring and achieving real measurable outcomes around climate change. That has not historically been the role of our staff, and it would be a shift. And it would also be a shift in how we engage with our grantees and engage with our state and federal partners. And so just something that I wanted to put in mind. Eric Williams is always great about raising that in conversations, and so I'm channeling him today.
Thanks, Courtney. I think that aligns with some of what I was thinking. So as I hear what you all are saying, and I feel the sense of urgency from you. when I think about what we do at OWEB, there's a leadership component, but there's also really we fund things. And so should we be thinking about this in the realm of the criteria that we evaluate proposals on, having more or having a focus to what does this do to mitigate for climate mitigation, adaptation, sequestration, and put some of the burden of coming to those answers on us, the evaluators of those proposals that are coming in, and have so that the grantees are writing to that. They know that it's a priority for funding. We've said climate projects that address climate in these ways somehow, and I don't know how we do this, and Courtney and Eric Williams will have to help me figure it out. That gives preference or additional priority to funding those projects, so that the onus isn't necessarily on the grantees, but the onus is on us to make sure we're funding the things that meet the goals of moving the climate initiatives forward. And then could we think about how we capture the outcomes of these projects in terms of the measurement quantification? I'm thinking about my words very carefully. In terms of a performance measure for our investments. Or am I way off target?
So a quick question, Lisa. I'm not sure I entirely understand what you're saying regarding how staff make decisions. So are you saying that there should be additional criteria that the grant writers will write to regarding climate, and then that the staff evaluate those, or that the staff simply take what they get and then try to interpret it relative to climate benefits?
I think it's somewhere in between, Brenda. So the one thing I would ask is, do you think the projects would be completely different than what we've been funding with climate criteria in place? Or is it the same work that our grantees have been doing, but we're trying to capture the benefits towards climate and identify projects that provide the most tangible benefits and measure those for what the dollars that you're investing? Staff are nodding, and maybe I'm still speaking Greek and I'm thinking too technical.
So this is Brenda McComb for the record. I think all of what you said, I agree. But I think by having explicit criteria written in, it forces the grant writers to think more deeply about what it is that they're doing, right? So that I don't think that the focus of the projects that come through are likely to change dramatically, but the means by which they implement those projects should change over time. And that the monitoring that's done should reflect the benefits of those actions.
So can you repeat something to me? Because I'm trying to process it. The means by how they do the projects. Can you detail that just a little more? Tease that apart for me so I can get a picture of it in my head.
Well, you say you have a proposal to restore a stream reach. There are a number of ways of going about that, right? I mean, one is you could do nothing, just let it simply take time. That has a carbon cost and a carbon benefit. Or you could remove some of the vegetation that is problematic and replace it with vegetation that's beneficial for whatever resource you're managing. That has carbon benefits and costs. Or you could come in with bulldozers, scrape the whole thing clean, and start all over again. Each of those has a trajectory toward reaching your goal, over a certain period of time, some of which have greater benefits and greater likelihood of adaptation in terms of future trajectories for carbon storage and sequestration and productive ecosystems. So which one is likely to be the have the least impact on climate change? You know, get the grant writers thinking through some of these trade-offs so that the outcome is something that not only benefits the resources, but also contributes to benefiting the planet.
Okay, so Courtney, Eric H, thinking about that comment, if we were to do that, to try and achieve these goals, could we do it by changing the application and adding questions that people had to respond to related to the impacts of the activities? And can we add evaluation criteria when our evaluators look at applications to help prioritize those for what we take to the board, moving those projects that have the most climate benefit? So there's some preference to those and they move up because that's a focus. We're still doing watershed restoration, wildlife habitat. That's the short term of kind of the mission of the $76, right? But we're looking at how people are doing it and the longer term benefit to climate, so that we're using that in terms of how we're evaluating and ranking. Ranking is the word I need.
So first off, I'd say, you know, we can do anything we decide to. And I would actually, one of the things, the first things when you ask that, Lisa, that pops into my mind is, I think it's really important to hear from our grantees about how that will impact them. What is the lag time to adjust and change their thinking? What are, I think what both Kelly and Corey have raised, what are the additional technical resources they need in order to answer those questions, in order to think about that? I know Eric Williams and Liz Redon have done a lot of work in training our review teams. So what is the lag time to train our review teams? And again, what is the guidance our review teams are getting from their state and federal agencies? How are they going to bring that over? And so those are the things that pop into my head. And then also, again, if grantees start falling below the line or not being recommended for funding because of this, how will that impact the staffing levels at some of our smaller entities that literally live from grant cycle to grant cycle in order to keep their doors open? So these are the initial things that pop into my head that, you know, we have to think about. And I think it's great that we're having this conversation today because I think it'll give us a chance then to hear from our grantees via the public comment at the board meeting, and they can help us understand where they are.
Thanks. So Bruce, you have a comment?
Eric?
Oh, I was looking, okay, sorry. Eric, good. Bruce?
David, sorry, Eric, anything else to add?
Oh, well stated, Courtney, thanks.
Thanks, Courtney. I appreciated your comments on that. And I would say that when I hear concerns that you're expressing as possibly coming from the grantees, or maybe you've already heard those, then I would really be curious on what the options that you see on meeting those, on dealing with that, and how we can make that happen. Because I don't believe that any of that would preclude us from moving forward. It just gives us a challenge on how to move forward. And Lisa, what you just described was probably the best definition I think I've ever heard of climate lens. I mean, that was it. That was in essence how you use a climate lens. So, and the last comment I would make is that while I would anticipate particularly seeing work that people like the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts is doing on sequestration, the work that Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts has talked about on climate, that we're going to get on the other side. We're going to have people who are concerned about how it's going to affect me. Do I have enough resources? But also groups of important groups of grantees that are saying this is what we want to do, and we want recognition for what we're doing. So, and I don't think and additionally, I don't think we should exclude the possibility that there will be a new, there can be more new approaches to grant requests coming to us with this kind of a focus. A lot of discussion at the Climate Committee has melded DEI, urban landscapes, urban watersheds. Jamie's talked a lot about that. Urban tree canopies, water quality, and those. We may start to see new groups, non-historic partnerships come forward when they see the opportunity of a climate lens. So I think we also should be prepared and encourage not only our existing partners, but also this new group we've talked about.
All right. Audrey, then Brenda, then Eric, and then we probably need to talk about next steps forward. This has helped to clear up, for me anyway, to help clear up some of the questions that I had in my head of trying to get there. And I have some ideas of now how we can get there. Go ahead, Audrey.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I just wanted to underscore two things that that have come up and tie them together a little bit. The concept of kind of asking grantees, what are your constraints? There is going to be a lot of information. Jesse described earlier, coming in through the questions that were added to the fall of 2021 open solicitation application. So a lot of that information is already beginning to come in. It's going to be, I think, very informative in terms of constraints, grantees, and it behooves us to learn from what they're telling us in response to those questions. And then the second thing I wanted to underscore a little bit back to some of Jamie's comments, and the words measuring and metrics came up numerous times. So through, and Bruce mentioned this, through the work of the Global Warming Commission and the Natural and Working Lands recommendation, for the first time kind of recommending a sequestration goal for the land sector for Oregon. There was collaboration already among OWEB, Agriculture, Forestry, and DEQ under the Executive Order 20-04, and really detailed recommendations, how we need better baseline, we need to be able to measure progress over time, and establishing a basis for those agencies to continue some collaboration towards better defining those metrics and measures is part of the work of outlined and recommended in the Natural and Working Lands proposal. So there's a baseline there and a basis there.
Eric?
Thanks, a good point, Audrey. I just want to quickly comment on, I think Jamie said earlier that our applicants and grantees are very creative, and indeed they are. And one way that I think that we would definitely want to incorporate their feedback is through our traditional rulemaking advisory committees. So if the board wishes to open up the evaluation criteria, what we typically do is make those advisory committees composed, not entirely, but mostly out of our regular applicants and grantees. And they are a great bunch, and they will really help us and to determine the right language to use when considering evaluation criteria with climate.
Brenda?
Just very quickly, I was struck by the analogy to the layers of the onion. And I think that we need to start peeling back layers, and we need to start peeling them back now. Recognizing that we're not going to be able to peel back all the layers at this point because we don't have all the information and we don't have all of the guidance that we need. And we also need to recognize that as we peel back those layers, we're going to be able to peel back more layers a year from now and 5 years from now and 10 years from now than we can now. But we've got to get started. And so, I guess my point is, let's take action and at least start with that outer layer or the outer few layers of that onion.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So a couple of thoughts for steps forward. Part of the reason that I like the resolution is because it has the setup of why we're doing it. Then I think what I hear you all saying we need to do is to look at the criteria that we use for evaluating grants, because that's what you all do. We granted OWEB, we grant money, and make sure that we've added criteria, and I think we have to do that by rulemaking, into that process so that it helps us rank projects. So people know that they should be writing to it and thinking about how they do it, because it will impact what gets funded. I think that's the piece of it, right? Then we need to think about then how we use those responses to rank it internal. So there's a piece for people to respond to. They know that climate's going to be part of the criteria. Then as we look at ranking them, we need to do whatever we have to do with our committees that do that. Courtney, I need Eric to help think about how that would happen. And then I'm thinking about it again in terms of measurement, putting more of that measurement onus on the agency through a performance measure. So is there a way to split, to Jamie's point a while ago? I think there's good stuff in the resolution that sets the goals in action and why we're doing it. What would you be telling us to do? What would the board want us to do so we can meet things? You need us to go to rulemaking. We need to add climate criteria to our evaluation processes. We need to consider, or maybe we give consider preference, I don't know, to projects that have a greater impact on whatever that is. I need you guys to help think about, to fill in the words. And then could the measurement piece be in direction of the resolution, or something for the agency to develop some measurements, whether it's a performance measure or some accounting of, so that we have some tangible documentation of what the investments are getting us in terms of climate. Bruce?
Lisa, I just want to clarify one thing really quick. So when you talk about the ranking, so just to be clear, our review team members use the criteria to determine fund, do not fund, fund with conditions, and then use criteria to develop the rank order. So it's all that would be done through the rulemaking and development of those criteria. It's not separate criteria, just to be clear.
But it would be adopting. So Courtney, make sure, so my words make sense with our process, and I don't completely, fully understand.
It would be built into the decision to fund, do not fund, fund with conditions, and it would be built into the review team's process by which they rank those projects. That rank list comes to OWEB, where we then decide where to draw the line for funding. OWEB staff do not reorder ranking. We do not reorder based on the review teams who are the experts, because we are not the experts, they are. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
So to the point of fund, do not fund, for clarity, are there projects that would come to us that would have no benefit to climate? Are there? So Bruce, help me with that. Because if they didn't, does that mean they would be a do not fund?
Well, are you saying that if we had that with our current ranking that we have something that doesn't meet, ranks a 0 on one aspect, one particular criteria, never gets funded? Yeah, because I didn't understand that. That's, first off, I nodded maybe too quickly. I think there's always we'll almost always be able to find, if not always find, some climate co-benefit, whether it's resilience or in any of these projects. Some of them may be very climate action forward and have a great deal, be able to quantify and look great. Some of them might be a resilience co-benefit that once Paul was talking about earlier. So I doubt we'll ever see a 0. That said,
and I would,
yeah,
I'm sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I would just clarify, we, for the purposes of this, I would say we are talking about our restoration action grants that we fund. I think it's a little bit of a different conversation when we're talking about stakeholder engagement or, you know,
Sure.
the capacity of the councils and districts that we fund. All important pieces of the conversation, but I think there's a restoration bucket when you're talking about, you know, net benefit of climate change that you are likely referring to.
Yeah, Courtney, I think that's what the climate committee's been talking about all the way through. And we actually, in the definition that the climate committee proposed for a climate lens, it characterized the climate lens as a ranking tool, and not the ranking tool, but a ranking tool. So now, what I don't know how you want to move forward, Lisa, but I would say that if any members of, if you're going to take this back to look at the resolution, the document that you sent, I think we should invite members of the climate committee to send any suggestions or edits they would like back to whomever you, to you or whoever you want it to go to. I'll only make one comment on the document that you sent out. Like Jamie, or I think it was Brenda, I like a great deal of what's in this resolution. I think it encompasses a lot of the vast majority of what was in the statement of purpose and the accompanying documents, the preamble. I thought we might want to mention nature-based solutions in the document itself, but at least reference it at some point. My only major issue is the actual resolution. Be it resolved that the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board's board recommends that OWEB's investments in agency business operations should. I'm confused on the board is recommending to whom? Or I didn't know who. So we're a board and we're recommending to what? Ourselves as the board, or we're recommending, or are we actually saying that the board investments in agency operations will?
I think I wish I would have had this conversation to build upon what we did for the resolution. I didn't have the background conversation.
Sure.
This conversation has helped a bunch. in terms of trying to think about how, you know, to provide a framework to get us to where we want to go with this. So I think it's the resolution needs to be it resolved that OWEB's investments will do blah, 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 whatever that is.
Yeah.
And we will do that through adding criteria, through a rulemaking process, whatever those things are. I mean, I think it's clear we need to do a rulemaking process that provides we have to, if we're going to change our criteria, it has to be done in rule. That's my understanding, right? So we have to have a rulemaking process. So OWEB needs to initiate a rulemaking process. We need to come up with what those considerations are. And then there is process time then for our applicants to weigh in as well. But I think we need to say what we are going to do. You are going to prioritize. We are going to prioritize investments that have measurable impacts on climate. And in so doing, these are the things we have to do to get that going. And that would be the next set of actions. That's how I'm thinking about approaching it, Bruce. Does that get you where you wanted to go? With enough expediency?
I would pull the committee on that. Brenda, what do you think?
It seems like a logical plan. I'm not entirely clear how long it would take to get through all of this and actually see some tangible changes.
So rulemaking is going to take a bit, but if we're going to add criteria, I think we have to do it in rule. You know, typically rulemaking is a 6-month process. So that needs to be to wade into this. So you guys, we go into it eyes wide open. But those are the tools that we would have to use to make the changes. But it does get the changes started, and it does embed them into our process, and help us develop then the outcomes from there. Jamie and then Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I in my comments before, I felt like I was leaning more towards the SOP, but whether it's a reso or an SOP, I mean, the bottom line is, will there be results? Are we moving forward? Are we establishing sufficient specifics? In terms of rulemaking, much respect to our process. I think rulemaking can take a long time or take a short time. I think with a sense of urgency that the emphasis on a shorter time, saying this, I know that OWEB just got a bunch of money to help on wildfire recovery. So I'm just in that context of reality. But I think in my mind, the intent of moving forward with an SOP was to work on, which would really trigger rulemaking in terms of the specifics that we're talking about. But the intent was to start aligning the expectation amongst our partners that this would be in place, not for, you know, whatever happens next summer, but that was going to be the last time. And then as new applications came in, the standards were going to be in place. And so a real push on getting it done in a timely manner and working with our partners to say, hey, we really welcome their input to figure out how to get it done. But the understanding is we're moving in that direction, and this is where we're headed. So, you know, invite you to get on board and help us to get there in a way that works for you. Because I think, again, you know, Kelly's comments and the other comments made before were really, and Corey's comments were really well made. And then just, I really appreciate, Bruce, you following up on that, the board directs. I mean, we want to be really clear, this is action. This is not, we're not kind of thinking about the idea anymore. We're now starting to take action. We're just trying to figure out how to do it, and do it in a way that it is, that we have expected outcomes and concrete goals.
Let me make sure that I'm clear. The action is the board wants to prioritize funding that has the most climate impact. Is that correct?
I see this as there's priority because there are always limited resources, but that's really an expectation that becomes part of our work. But I also go back to the comment of I mean, this is partially establishing the criteria and allocation of funding to fund that work. It's also working with some of our state and federal partners to help this be doable for our partners on the ground. So it's not all on their shoulders. But yeah, if we get, I would see a year and a half from now, if we're in a funding cycle, a year and a half from now, and a project comes through that is not clearly helping us to move forward in this long-term goal and expectation. I went back and it's right on the website, and the charge for the board is to make sure those are the investments. We're investing public funds in those long-term goals in our communities. If it can't meet that criteria, then it won't be funded. And a very good point's been made that a lot of the projects we now fund meet that. But I think we also want to challenge ourselves to see if we can be more strategic in having a greater impact. So yeah, part of it is measuring the great work that's being done now, and part of it is seeking opportunities to either more clearly tell the story of the long-term impacts and investment in our watersheds, or also look for other strategies to be more effective and having greater impact. And not or.
So Jesse, Stephanie, Courtney, Eric, Audrey, given this conversation, does it help you understand more in terms of the desired direction than what we had when we started? Okay, that's good. First check.
Paul?
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a kind of a general sort of editorial suggestion building on Bruce's. First of all, I agree with Bruce's clarification on the resolution part, be it resolved part. And then that's a fair amount of bullets. I don't know, it's like 12 to 14 or 15 for a resolution. And I was thinking, and many of them are sort of overlap a bit, or they say similar things in different ways. And kind of getting to the point of being, a little more clear and explicit. I think I'm not offering up edits, specific edits here, although I could in the future, but just a general note to maybe for someone to look at those bullets and see about consolidating them down into a smaller number, I think would be really helpful.
Okay.
Moses only needed 10.
I go by the rule of 3 personally, but.
So if we went back, what do you all think about having a second meeting and we go do some more work? You guys provide us some comments, and I would say they would go to Jesse and Stephanie in terms of the language. Are you okay with the rest? I think you have we need the resolution to give the direction to people. This is where we're going. And this is how we will invest our dollars in projects that do something. The action piece probably is part of that statement of purpose of what OWEB needs to go do on the operations side in terms of developing the climate lens through the actions. And I don't have a good idea right now how we would incorporate both sets of language. I've got an idea of how I now think I better understand what you want as an outcome. But did we rework the resolution? And come back and talk about it again. Sorry, my computer just did something crazy. There we go. With some rework language that just focus on the language, with full knowledge and intention that I think on the operations side of the agency, we need to do some work around rulemaking to make things happen for the next grant cycle for restoration grants. Did I get that right, Courtney? We're talking about restoration grants.
I'm just going to jump in here that our next application deadline is April 2022. We can't get rulemaking done and make changes to an online application by then.
Okay.
It would be a stretch because, again, we have to go in and change application questions in a lead time before applications are due to get this done by October 2022. So I just want you guys to be in context where, you know, we announce a grant offering 3 months before the application deadline, so grantees can see the questions, prepare, write their applications. And so all of these things, the train is moving. And so we do have to figure out, and we can come back and talk to the board about when can we jump on that train and what does that look like, but definitely don't have answers. I don't have answers on the fly today, and Eric Williams will be key to that conversation.
Yeah, and real quick, adding to that, Courtney and Lisa, the questions that were added to a subset of climate or a subset of OWIP applications, as discussed in the past with the climate committee, land acquisitions and monitoring applications don't open until 2022. So if we want to get kind of the responses back from those application types, which we previously discussed, we'd be looking at getting responses after those cycles close in 2022.
Okay, so maybe the timing's off, but ultimately, I think what's being asked is that we look at the criteria. We'll have to do some adjustments in rulemaking so that it's considered in how the investments are made with a climate lens.
Brenda?
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if it would be helpful, I think it would be helpful for me, maybe for others, to have a timeline with when things would be done so that we and the people writing the proposals could see, where we're headed here and what the likely endpoint would be, recognizing that it's probably never going to end. But thank you.
I appreciate the never going to end, Brenda, because I think this is one of those continuous improvement things. We start, we check, and we probably have to readjust along the way, but we need to get started. That's what I hear you saying. And I'm gonna, I guess, apologize a little bit. Probably having the change in leadership has not helped the expediting this, because I've had so many questions about how to do it and get it done right. I needed this conversation to help align that in terms of the outputs to get us to the larger outcome.
Lisa, thanks for that, and coming in and doing as much as you've done, as quickly as you've done it. I'm sure that the rest of the committee, and certainly I appreciate it. I know there are challenges, time challenges with staff that you're going to have to filter through. It's not board members' responsibility or a committee's responsibility to assign or prioritize work of staff. That all goes straight to you and your leadership team. So I like the request from Brenda that we when you can do it, you can give us a timeline that we can share. I would also ask that you maybe drop an email out to the committee members on where we should send any comments, edits that we might suggest, to who you want it to go to, so we can get it out there and when you'd like it. Are we okay on time as far as another meeting on notification, public meeting and all that? We can still do that. And so certainly I'm willing to do that. And hopefully the other committee members can fit that into their busy schedule. And lastly, for me, Kelly and Corey, thank you so much for joining the climate committee. Your addition will obviously be helpful, and so thank you.
Bruce, I apologize. Can I have just one other point, just a reflection on today. It's been a great conversation. And I just want to thank everyone because we're all doing our jobs here. We're board members are feeling that sense of urgency, are really pushing. Staff members are saying, we get it, we agree with you, but this has got to be reality. We've got to follow the guidelines. We've got to make sure we're engaging folks. And so I just want to thank everyone because I'm really feeling a strong commitment on everyone's part to find ways to work with our partners to move forward, to do this really important work, and to do it the ways we need to do following state requirements and following public engagement requirements, which we're all committed to. But that natural tension we're feeling, I think, is a really healthy one. So I just want to say, I think I'm seeing this as really positive, but it's not, be really clear to staff, this is not board members being anything but impressed with the work you're doing and not being frustrated with your work you're doing. We just have this sense of urgency, and it's our job to really push, and it's your job to say, and at times push back and say, we're getting there. We have to follow the road to get there. So I just want to thank everyone for that. And especially Bruce and Brenda for really championing, pushing, and creating that tension, because I think it's necessary for us to move forward. So just really want to express that appreciation to everyone.
Paul has his hand up. Paul put his hand down.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't have my hand up. Thank
Okay,
you.
Stephanie does now, it looks like. But her camera went off.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up. Apologies, everybody.
Okay, so we're coming across.
No one has their hand up. You're good, Lisa. No one has their hand up.
Good, because it's showing it on my screen and I don't understand why. So thank you. Thanks for all of your comments. I appreciate that. And I do appreciate the conversation today to work through it, because this is helping me understand how the staff move this forward in a way that we can get some meaningful results. So Stephanie and Jesse are going to be lead on this in terms of doing the work. They'll circle back and get something out to the committee in terms of next meeting's timeline. And if the committee members could look at the resolution, if that's a comfortable tool. This will be the first resolution the OWEB board has adopted, to my knowledge. I've asked everybody, and I don't think there has been one previously. But it does a good job of, I think, really giving people notice of the direction and then the how we're going to get their part. And I hear you on the how, and I hear you on the need to move the how in an expedient way to get things going.
One last, Lisa, a quick question. We have Corey, Brenda, myself, Jamie, Kelly, Steve, if he's here. Is the climate committee starting to run into a quorum issue with voting members?
Look to Eric.
We were okay when it came to quorum, but we're also doing this in a public forum as well.
So that we're covered with that?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
I think that's one of the beauties, Bruce, of us doing these as public meetings. It helps us to be able to expand the conversation. Okay. Anything else to wrap this up? Thank you, everybody.
I guess I would just add, probably look for something from April, probably ASAP if you guys want to meet again, to get something calendared.
So I think we do want to meet again because we want to land on something in terms of language to move forward in the full board meeting in January. And Bruce is nodding again, so I think I've got it right. Thanks, Brenda. And you're good, Jamie? Paul? Kelly, you good? Excellent. Corey? Awesome. Okay, we'll go do some more work. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.